Hey everyone, and welcome back to another video. So today we're going to talk all about playing from behind. We're going to talk about playing from behind in the early game, in the mid game, as well as in team fights. And as always, everything is timestamped below, so let's get into it. So let's start off with concepts for playing from behind in the early game. So one of the most important things when you're behind in the early game is actually your wave control. So you can see here that I'm against a Fedley Sin. He's got a kill and he's got double buffs, which means it's very hard to trade against him. When you're kind of falling behind in the early game, it's really important that you keep the wave on your side. And this does several things for you, as I've talked about in wave control videos before. It allows you like somewhat safety from ganks unless you're getting dived. It makes it easier just to CS because you're closer to your tower, and it's also much harder for your opponent to kind of run you down the lane. So one big mistake I see in a lot of coaching sessions is when people fall behind, they still try and push out aggressively, because obviously if you push out, it does allow you prior and it does allow you to do things, which feels good. But the problem is if you try and push, it can make you very gankable, and also it really gives the enemy champion like the opportunity to just run you down the lane or trade on you really hard. So I would really recommend trying to keep the wave. It doesn't have to be like completely under your tower, but at least like sort of outside your tower here when you fall behind. Another thing is, if possible, you should try and avoid taking too much damage, because as I said before, you can be dived. It doesn't mean like you never look for trades. Obviously, if they waste cooldowns or if you see an opportunity to trade, you should still go for it. And we'll talk about windows kind of that you can punish in a bit. But you can see here that I actually thought I would win this trade because I was fighting my creeps, but he was just too strong in the 1v1 with his double buffs here. So you really want to avoid this kind of stuff. Like a lot of the time, you can just wait for this wave to come to you. As you can see, there were like no creeps that were dying there. So I didn't really need to walk up and do that. And the only reason I did it is because I actually thought I'd win the trade. But yeah, you don't need to do this, and you don't need to lose all this HP. And that's really important, because if you do lose HP like this, now you can be dived under tower, either 1v1 or by the junglers. So to start off with, main goals, try and avoid trading too much, especially like losing a lot of HP like this, and also try keep the wave like on your side, or at least pushing to you, and that way you're kind of like allowed to free farm a tower a bit more, and you'll generally like be harder to all in and a bit harder to punish. Next, we have itemization. So as you guys know, itemization is really important in a lot of different matchups, but especially when you fall behind, it's pretty good to buy some sort of defensive stats. So here I've gone for the Merc Treads. You normally go Merc Treads as Zoe versus Syndra because the movement speed and the MR and tenacity are all really valuable. So as you can see here, it's allowing me to dodge a lot of extra skill shots that I normally wouldn't be able to. And then it also allows me to kind of tank this combo and sustain it back up. So like if I didn't have Merc Treads here, you would probably see that without the movement speed, I'd be getting hit by a lot more of these skill shots. Without the MR, I probably would have died anyway. So that makes a really big difference. And there's a lot of different ways you can itemize. Like a lot of the time people think that the only way you can itemize is by building like actual items. Like you have to build Merc Treads or you have to build Seekers and stuff like that. But that's not actually true. Even if you're not going to build into an item, sometimes you can itemize something like a component that builds into it. So for example, let's say that in your build, you're just going to go like Ludens, Rabadons, like a full AP build. If you fall behind, you might just want to buy like a Ruby Crystal or a Cloth Armor or a Null Magic Mantle, one of those really cheap components that you can sell later on, just because it really helps you slow down the enemy snowball. Also, movement speed can be a good defensive stat for dodging skill shots or for kiting people out. So keep that in mind, that if you fall behind, oftentimes you can just buy like, MR, HP, armor, something like that, and just sell it later on. And that can help as well. When you fall behind in the early game, one thing you can sometimes abuse is a difference in champion identities. So in this example here, Nocturne versus Lucian, Lucian is really good at isolated 1v1. He will just like easily win lane if we're just allowed to 1v1 here. So in that sense, I am behind. I can't easily get priority without taking a lot of damage for it. And I can easily be denied of CS. But Nocturne's champion identity is he's very good at skirmishing, and that's something that Lucian is not very good at in the early game. While Lucian can generate priority over the mid wave and like look to roam with that, he's not actually that great in the fights themselves, whereas Nocturne is extremely good at skirmishing. So here I'm trying to avoid the 1v1. You can see I'm playing to just kind of let this wave come to me. Again, not taking too much damage. But if I can find an opportunity to start a skirmish in the river like this, draw Lucian away from his strength and into mine, it can sometimes allow you to get back into the game like that. You can see here, I just easily killed the Rumble. Lucian is caught like mega out of position. So obviously it's like, you're not always going to get the opportunity to get 2 free kills like that. But what you do want to look for is your champion identity. If you can bring your opponent away from what they're good at and towards what you're good at, that can sometimes allow you to claw yourself back into the game. Let's look at another example. Here we have Corki versus Aurelia. So as we all know, Aurelia is extremely strong in 1v1, also really, really good at skirmishing. So 2 things that Corki is very bad at. But what is Corki good at? He's really good at poking, he's really good at scaling, and also he's pretty good at wave clearing. So as Corki, if you're kind of behind in the early game, and also worth noting is that being behind can just be being behind in your matchup. You know, like Corki is never going to contest Aurelia, as you guys probably know. So in this situation, I'm just trying to keep the wave at my tower pretty much the whole time. So I will either just clear waves that she pushes to me, or I will try like pull the wave up like this in order to keep it from crashing. She will sometimes come back. I will just keep looking to clear tower or at the tower like this. So as long as you can kind of keep this state, it's more advantageous to you, right? Because you're avoiding her strength, you're not getting into skirmishes, you're not getting into 1v1, and you're kind of playing to your strength. You're just scaling, you're just wave clearing at tower. If your champion happens to be good at roaming, you can look to roam to other lanes and pick up some kills. I probably wouldn't do this if your champ is not good at roaming, like don't try and force it. But one thing that's really good is actually to roam to your winning lane. So in this situation here, as you can see, I'm down a level to Fizz, and I think this is 2-0 and I'm 0-1. But what I do have going for me is that this Kai'Sa's level 7, Draven's level 5, and I also have Echo on my side of the map. So basically it's like, by roaming to my winning lane, I know that any fight we take around here is probably favorable for us. And also like Ahri's pretty good at roaming, like you can add a lot with your charm and stuff, even if you fall behind. So I'm able to come down here and actually pick up some kills, which puts us in a really good spot to win this game. And I was like super behind in the 1v1. Like I couldn't really do anything versus a 2-0 Fizz. And I just come down here, and a lot of you will probably say like this is getting carried, and you're absolutely right. Like when you play from behind, you are kind of just looking to get carried, right? But there are ways to still be useful when you're behind, and not just like get carried in the sense of like AFK sitting under your tower, but get carried in the sense of like being more of a facilitator or like a utility player. Even if you fall behind in the 1v1, a lot of champions still have really good gank setups, so with smart wave control or good positioning, you can oftentimes burn flashes or get kills for free, and if you manage to pick up some of these, you can really get yourself back into the game, and more importantly, you kind of slow down the enemy's snowball. Like, even if you can't get a kill, you can oftentimes kind of like curb their aggression. Playing aggressively without flash is much more difficult, or playing aggressively, you know, without an ultimate that they might use or whatever. Like say you gank an Ahri and she ults to get out, it really gives you like a much bigger window to play with. So always be looking to set up ganks, especially if you have CC in your kit. But as I said before, when you fall behind in the early game, you generally want to avoid the 1v1. That being said, there are a few windows we can take advantage of, and the big windows really are people not having stuns or not having key cooldowns, like either their ults or just really important basic cooldowns. So this is the same replay as before, and as you know, we just burned Malzahar's flash. I'm pretty behind in the 1v1. As you can see, he has more items than me, and also he's a higher level than me, so it's kind of difficult to lane right now, but I do have this advantage of knowing he doesn't have flash. LeBlanc is very good at chasing people down, so without flash, I can look for something quite aggressive. Also here is he moves up to the wave and uses all his cooldowns, so I can tell right now when he's moving up to the wave that he's about to use cooldowns on it. He's about to EQ it. So here, when he uses E and Q, I immediately dive onto him, knowing he has no flash and no cooldowns to trade back, and I just pick up an easy kill. So again, not possible every game. You are just looking to punish your opponents when they make mistakes, but I guarantee that some of the time your opponents will waste key cooldowns, and that can be a really good opportunity to either just go for a small trade or to go for an all-in. You don't just have to punish these windows in the 1v1. You can also look to force skirmishes or team fights or whatever when you know your opponent is missing key cooldowns. So here we pinged Vladimir's Ignite in the chat, and I believe also, yeah, I typed that he had no R. So we know Vladimir is very weak right now. On the other hand, we have Aurelio and we have Ariel. So we're very, very strong right now, and even though Vlad is 1-0 and would normally be really, really strong, it's at this kind of window when he doesn't have Ignite or ult that he's actually very weak. So we just come here, we're able to win this fight kind of for free. And this is like really, really important for you to take advantage of, because it's like, again, Vladimir is stronger than me right now. There's like no doubt about it. But in this like key window where he is missing his cooldowns and I have them, I'm actually stronger, and I abuse that to pretty much win our team the game. You know, the game was like maybe in a slightly bad spot here because they had a fed Jinx, a fed Vlad, but now like we're really starting to take over the top side. Aurelia and Nunu getting really fed, so the game is in a good spot again. The last really important thing for the early game is actually your warding. So I'm going to explain some of the really important wards for you to use when behind. So as we said before, when you're behind, you probably want the wave on your side of the lane. That means that you're probably going to have it somewhere like right here. Let's imagine you're this blue side mid laner. And this means several things. One, it means that you can't really ward the enemy jungle very easily because you just don't have the priority to do so. But it also means that because your wave is here, that you're not really gankable. And that means that you don't really have to ward for yourself. You can actually ward pretty much completely for your team. Your main goal when you're warding for your team from behind is to kind of keep track of the enemy mid laner and slow down their roams if possible. So there's a few really good wards. You can look to either pink or green ward this bush here. I think this is really, really solid. This stops your opponent from just walking down here for free. It also means that they might spend a turn just clearing the pink ward, and that could be their roam opportunity completely gone. So that can be a really good ward. If you don't have a pink, like you can just green ward here somewhere. Also, you can look to just like ward over the wall. So you could come here, say, and ward maybe right here, and that would tell you if your opponent is doing anything in the top river. Another really good ward, obviously, is just to ward the lane. So you can ward somewhere like right here. And this is really useful because you will see if your opponent is going like this way or this way. If they're basing back here, or obviously if they're not showing here, they're probably doing something bot side. So these four wards, I would say these four ward locations are really good and also pretty defensible. Like this pink is relatively easy to defend, and obviously you could pink this bush as well. Like there's a lot of different things you can do, but I really think the most important ones are just this ward and lane can be really good, especially against heavy roaming champions, or if you're scared of a particular lane being ganked, like if you're really scared of your top laner getting ganked or your bot laner getting ganked, you can look toward these places instead. And the wards are pretty much mirrored on the other side. So let me just clear all this. So you would have something like, you can place defensive wards like here or here, and we can look for wards like right here over this wall, or in the lane up like this. It's important to place it on the side opposite from the tower. So like on this side, you need to place it here. On this side, you need to place it here because otherwise it'll be in the turret range. But yeah, your main goals with these wards are really just to slow your opponent down, try and keep track of the enemy mid laner, and provide some useful vision for your team. Now we're moving on to the mid game. Now in the mid game, the most important thing to do when you're behind is to keep your farm up. And there's like a couple ways to do that. I think the most consistent is just to let waves come to you. In the mid game, it can be quite difficult to push waves out. Of course, you still want to push waves out if you're able to, but you've got to pay kind of close attention to the map. So if you see here, I caught that wave, I let it come to my tower, and then I CS'd it. If you actually look at the map here, I have no vision topside, and my entire team is bot side, so I feel quite scared. But I actually decided that the enemy team is probably on Herald, so I could come top and maybe push another wave here. So basically, you're just trying to keep up your CS, and you want to push out as far as you're able to safely, which will generally not be that far. As you can see here, I'm kind of scared to push another wave with no vision to my top side and or my team bot side. So you really just want to make sure consistently catching those waves, letting them come to you, not pushing out too far, but still taking the opportunity to push out if you're given it. Another really good way to keep up your farm in the mid game is just to farm as many camps as possible. This is actually really, really important because especially if you're on the losing team, a lot of the time you'll be getting pushed in, and these camps will actually be taken by the enemy team if you don't take them. It's also really important that if you're the strongest member on your team, that you're taking a lot of resources, because you will probably be able to carry the game better than if the resources kind of get, spread out or onto less valuable members. It's also pretty important that you make your farming somewhat efficient. So for example, you can farm like Krugs and Gromp are really good because they'll be next to side waves that you're farming. You could do something like, you can warp bot, farm the wave, take Krugs, farm another wave, and then like take Raptors or something. So you can set up these like little farming circuits, and I just think it's really important that you're farming camps on cooldown, especially if your jungler isn't anywhere near them, because it's almost guaranteed the enemy team will take them when they push into your jungle, so it's better if you can take them early and accelerate yourself towards your core items. If your champion's good at picking people, trying to find people face checking with no vision and killing them is a really, really good way to still out the game. So if you look at this situation here, we have control of the top side, but the enemy team is too strong to contest on the mid wave, and they also here, if they play it slow and steady, they can just push down the mid wave, make us show here, and then retake the Baron control. But especially in solo queue and kind of lower level competitive play, people will always make mistakes when they're coming back into a jungle where they don't have vision of. So you can really look to pick people, and if you can pick the enemy like jungler or ADC especially, it really slows down the game a lot. If you kill the jungler or AD, it makes it much harder for them to do objectives without the smite secure and usually without the DPS from the ADC. And that can slow the game down by about 2 minutes or so, as it takes time for them to kind of get back on the map and get set up again, retake vision and all of that sort of stuff. And 2 minutes of extra time for farming is really, really valuable. It can sometimes mean that you reach a core item that you wouldn't have before the next fight. So Obviously, you get gold for killing your opponent, but the time is what's really valuable, just allowing you to stall that little bit longer. So definitely look to kill people when they're face checking into areas with no vision. You can buy yourself more time by just not contesting fights that you know you can't win and just looking to farm and keep scaling instead. So this is something that is honestly quite hard to do in solo queue because a lot of the time your team will just fight anyway. But if you know you just can't win the fight, like there's just literally no chance, you're probably better off just playing selfishly and just farming the side lane, you know, pushing camps, trying to trade something on the other side of the map instead, because just going to a fight and dying, it just like really isn't worth it. Obviously, if you can get your team to back off from it and just none of you die and you guys just keep farming, keep scaling, like that works as well. But just contesting a fight that you know you're going to lose is basically the worst thing you can possibly do, and instead you should just look to try and trade something somewhere else on the map. Something else you can look for if your team is winning but you're still kind of behind is to try and pick on the enemy team's like weakest member or the members that don't have flash. If you fall behind but your team is ahead, chances are someone on the enemy team is not that strong, and a lot of the time you can kind of just farm them to get back into the game. So in this situation here, like my team is actually doing quite well, but I'm not very strong. I'm a 1-3 LeBlanc. I only have 2 items at this point, but this is a no flash Jinx, and I think she has a bounty. I think she's like 5 and 2 at the time, so I can like reasonably easy kill her, get some gold off her. Actually did not have a bounty, but that's like a really good way to get back into the game and also to still be useful for your team, because again, just because you're behind doesn't mean that you can't do anything. It means you kind of need to pick and choose who you're killing instead. Lastly, we're going to talk about how to play from behind in team fights. The most important thing to look for is uneven number team fights. This means fights where you have more teammates than they do as a 5v4, a 5v3, something like that that stacks the odds in your favor for winning the team fight. So a really easy way to do this is to try just like force an engage or make a pick when you see people just like out of position or really split. So in this example here, I can see that their Ashe and Kayn are very separated from these two in the mid wave, and it's really easy to just force a fight. Obviously, stuff like this actually just applies even when you're winning as well, but it's just especially important when you're losing to try and find fights like this, because it's going to be very hard for you just to win a straight 5v5, especially if you're really behind. But if you see those opportunities when people are split like that, you can easily just like pull the trigger and sometimes get a couple quick kills. I'm going to show another example of this, but this one's kind of cheating because we're actually ahead here, but I thought it'd be a really good example anyway. So if you actually look at the map here, we've got more people on top side than they do. We've got Lee in top lane and we've got 4 people mid. Also, we know that they have a Sylas bot with no TP, so we really want to force a fight because it's 5v4 right now. In fact, I think I even look at bot lane and I actually missing ping that Sylas because I'm like, what is he doing? And so this would be the exact same thing you want to look for if you guys are behind. You just want to force a fight because you know that like the longer this fight goes, the better it's going to be for you, because eventually Lee Sin is going to get here. And also, like I said, we were ahead in this example, so we kind of just won the fight 4v4. But this is exactly the sort of thing you need to look for. Just be very confident about pulling the trigger, trying to start a fight when you see people like in the side lane with no TP or just really separated from their team. When your team is behind, especially if you're the one fed, it's really important that you don't get desperate in team fights. You still want to play to your team fight identity. If you look at this game state here, we actually just got a Baron, so we're like kind of coming back, but I'm the only really strong member of our team, and they've got this like really strong Sivir as well as a Wukong. So you could get desperate here and be like, okay, I just like need to kill this Sivir no matter what. I could try go in for a shuffle on her and maybe kill her, but like she has stopwatch, she probably has sums. It's going to be hard. So just keep playing to what your champion wants to do. Here, they're relatively short range. They've also got engaged that I can peel off. I can just look to a front to back team fight, and I'm pretty strong, right? So it's like, I think really common that I see in coaching sessions that people just, they start falling behind and then they kind of abandon what their champion wants to do in favor of just like, they think they have to do something special to win the fight. And sure, sometimes you might have to, but most of the time it's like, you shouldn't force something out of your champion that your champion doesn't normally do. You know, you're not really going to try assassinate people with Zillion, for example, right? You're just going to keep playing to what your champion does. And that's normally the best way to win these team fights. I brought it up before, but I'm going to bring it up again. I think flash punishment in team fights is so important. There's a lot of immobile carries that if they don't have flash are extremely vulnerable to being engaged on, to being picked, to being assassinated, to the point where in a lot of like really high elo play, a lot of the time people just won't like take fights if their carries don't have flashes. So it's really important that when a fight starts or before a fight starts, actually, that you know whether or not their carries have flashes and look to punish them, because there are just so many of them that just really don't have much counterplay and they need to play safer without flash. And especially in lower elos, people just won't respect that. They'll try play aggressively anyway, and it can really give you an avenue to come back into the game, because it doesn't really matter how much gold a carry has if they just get one shot, right? Because they don't put out any damage anyway. So if you have TP or your champion has a global, jungle, you can look for a TP flank on the enemy team. This is really, really good, especially when the enemy team is sieging with Baron, because a lot of the time they will be pushed too far up in a lane, and you can look to punish them. So here, these guys are pushed up very far. I know this Kalista, I think, doesn't have flash, so I ult in, and we're able to kill this Fed Kalista pretty early on in the fight, and we're kind of far behind, so it doesn't result in like a hard fight win or anything, but it's like pretty good considering that we're behind and we're trying to just stall out the Baron. And if you can get a pick like this when the enemy team is sieging with Baron, it generally means that their sieging is over. They're just kind of going to have to wait for their teammate to respawn, so that buys you again a lot of time to continue farming. So if you're playing any champion that's good at flanking, has DPs, you can look for this sort of thing and look to carry or look to catch a carry out of position, especially if they don't have flash. So guys, that is going to be it for this video. I do want to kind of say some last thoughts, and those are that the reality of falling behind is that you do have less options, and falling behind sucks. Like, you can do all these things in this video and you can still lose, right? Naturally, if you fall behind, you kind of lose agency over the game, so you should try and fix your play before you fall behind. I think that's more important, but this video is to help you if you do get in that situation, because even the best players make mistakes. They will eventually end up in situations, in holes that they kind of need to dig themselves out of. As some just general rules, if you're behind and your team is ahead, just try and chill out, not feed anymore, try and get carried. Still be useful, don't just do nothing, but try and just, you know, make yourself easy to get carried essentially. And if you're ahead but your team is behind, you really kind of need to prioritize yourself. You need to be quite selfish, make sure you're getting all the resources and playing towards your win condition, your champion identity, but also making sure you're involved in all the plays. If you can still win dragon fights, obviously you need to be in them. At the same time, if you can't win that dragon fight, then you should just not be there and just be pushing the side lane instead. If you did like this video, go ahead and like and subscribe, and if you have any questions, please leave them in the comment section below, and I'll see you next time.